All right, so I'm actually been in the rev cycle industry for many years. I've worked as managing PFS organizations, national organizations. But the reason why we're here today is part of my passion in rev cycle, and I actually started about 25 years ago in building segmentation models for tenant healthcare in the late 1990s. And this was one of the organizations that really adopted using data and analytics early, and everybody knows rev cycle industry is typically behind the times, but it was very fascinating, very interesting, and actually really enjoyed that. I started my own revenue cycle analytics company back in 2014 in order to provide some solutions to the industry. But like I said, I've also had multiple roles, including up to running large patient financial services organizations across the country. So I've lived all of the pain points that you all see in rev cycle every day. Just a few seconds about Meduit. I promise I won't spend much time here. Meduit's a large independent revenue cycle vendor, so we aren't owned by any major health system. We are independent. We do have hospitals across the country, almost all the states, thousands of physicians, 1,400 employees, and we're entirely focused on healthcare revenue cycle management. What makes us a little bit different, like I said, is that we're not backed by a large health system, so we have our own investment resources, and part of that led to my joining the company last year in order to build out some AI solutions. And I wanted to share some of my insight with you from an industry perspective. Again, this isn't a sales pitch, but just wanted to give you a little bit of my my background within the company. All right, so let's jump in and talk about where the industry is today. So COVID-19 is the latest example of really things that disrupt revenue cycle operations. In the past, these have been local things. So we might have a fire or a tornado or a flood or something that really disrupts your operations locally. And this is the first time that something has really affected the entire industry at the same time. And I think there's a lot of challenges with how we're having to change the way we do the work these days. But one of the things that I think is really going to do is kind of be the catalyst to finally push the industry forward in changing the way that we do business. It's not going to be business as usual when everything gets back. When COVID is done, things are going to still be different. More people are going to be working from home. We're going to have different priorities in how we do the work. But at the end of the day, as rev cycle leaders, you still got to bring in the cash. You still have to keep that revenue stream, stable for the hospital. And I think it creates this opportunity for AI-driven automation to really take a jump start into revenue cycle. Every health system's different, right? So everybody has their own payers, their own contracts, their own quirks with how the things are done, and so there's no magic bullet, right, that's going to solve everything within the industry. But I definitely think there are some tool sets that are out there, in order for us to adapt. And so I'm going to talk today a bit about what's available currently, in the industry that you should be taking a look at right now as we start to pull our heads up from kind of the pandemic of 2020 and start to look at planning moving forward. So in the past, options have really been adding staff or outsourcing in order to kind of meet those business needs, and definitely think that artificial intelligence and some of the new technologies that are out there are really going to create some opportunities for you to look at some different solutions. So rather than having to staff up or deal with huge backlogs of work that aren't getting done, I think there are some tools out there that can help you. So today, just to kind of recap what we're going to talk about, I want to share my experience, my perspective on the industry, We'll talk a little bit about ways that organizations are using this technology today in order to drive some value. And then at the end, I want to actually talk a little bit about what the implications are to the workforce and the employees of the rev cycle as things change. So just to talk a little bit about, artificial intelligence. So it's a bit of a buzzword, right? So if anybody participated in A&I or Becker's last year, there were a lot of companies talking about AI. AI, think of AI as more like a toolbox, a set of things that you can employ to drive efficiency and automation in an organization. It's not a product, right? It's not like you're going to go out and buy a box of AI off the shelf and plug it in and make it run. So, obviously, I think that there are some nuances to this, and I want to talk a little bit about kind of what this means. So in my mind, there's really four kind of key pieces of what people think of as artificial intelligence that you should be aware of. And I'll talk a little bit about each of these, and then I'm actually going to circle back and talk about some business applications for each of these. But let me cover them all first. So the first one is regression analytics, and this is what's been around for decades. Really, it's segmentation, it's scoring, it's predicting behavior. And the easiest example that I can think of to correlate with this is your credit score, your FICO score, right? So all that is this huge computer model that looks at millions of people, millions of profiles, and says people who looked like this in the past have these characteristics on their credit. They tend to behave a certain way. They pay their bills, they don't pay their bills, whatever that is. And that's really kind of the idea of a credit score model. So that application has been around actually in RevCycle for a while. There have been companies that do propensity to pay scoring and talk about whether this patient bill is going to be paid or not paid. Originally, early in the cycle, that was really kind of the space of outsourced vendors that provide those data solutions. A lot of larger organizations have transformed to doing that in-house themselves. So there's definitely some applications around predictive algorithms, and I'll talk a little bit about that again in a few minutes about how you would actually apply those in RevCycle today. The second, set of tools under artificial intelligence umbrella is robotic process automation. So RPA, or robotic process automation, it enables the replication of what your employees do with all of the different systems. So whether they're working in hospital information system, Epic or Cerner or Meditech, whether they're working on a patient payer website, logging in to get information, whether they're working in Excel, whether they're emailing. Robotic process automation can really pull all of these together. I mean, I'm sure all of you have done scripting, right? So scripting for patient accounting has been around for decades. To mass data entry, mass updates on accounts, that sort of stuff. It's been around for a long time, but that's always been kind of self-contained within one application, right? You're just updating your patient accounting system. About 10 years or so ago, there was kind of a proliferation of web bots. So going out to payer websites and grabbing information and bringing that back and putting that back into your patient accounting system, which is, was value add, right? It cut down the time that it took employees to take those steps to go do that research, and then they had that information at their fingertips. And in the last 3 or 4 years, there's been this huge explosion of this new technology around robotic process automation. So there's some large companies like UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism. You might have heard of these companies that have created this set of tools to be able to actually create automations that move across different applications. So like I said, whether you're moving from patient accounting to going to a payer website, to writing an email, to documenting, tracking things in Excel, all of those different applications are now possible for automation within these technology platforms. They're really sophisticated. They can record what users do to interact with applications on their screens, so that the developers can edit those workflows and replicate that and add controls into that. And it's really getting interesting. I mean, I think that the ability to replicate what humans are doing within all of our systems, with all our rev cycle systems, is really taking off. And I'm very excited about it. Obviously, you know, it's part of my day job, but I think from an industry, I think there's so much opportunity for us to be able to capture this. So I'll talk about a few examples here in a second. The third piece, and this is probably the closest that RevCycle is going to get to artificial intelligence, is something called supervised machine learning. So this is where a rules engine essentially can learn by repetitive validation of what our subject matter experts, our RevCycle experts, our lead collectors, our superstar employees do every day. Like, it can capture and start picking up that information, and it can look at, you know, what are the outcomes? Did the action that was taken drive what I was expecting? Did that claim get paid, or did it get moved on to the next payer or to the patient? You know, is that really the right solution? So it's able to actually capture this and train this over time. Like, you think of, you know, a child growing up, obviously there's a lot of learning and repetition, and over time they absorb all that information, and then they repeat it and they replicate it out. And I think that's really where the you know, optimal use of AI comes into RevCycle. The fourth area is what we would call unsupervised machine learning. This is kind of the science fiction version of AI, where you just have a machine that goes and knows what it needs to do and does it, and doesn't ask, you know, what's going on. I actually don't think that rev cycle industry is ever going to get to this level of unsupervised learning. And the reason of that is because there's so much regulatory risk and compliance risk with how we do our business that we can't just turn a machine loose and hope it does it the right. So, for example, if you had some unsupervised robot out there trying to work accounts, and it found that if you changed a modifier on a code, it would get paid. Well, great, the machine learned that that's what it needs to do to get paid, but it doesn't necessarily have the context to say, no, coding guidelines say you can't use that modifier, that's inappropriate, right? And then we don't want to open ourselves up to that risk of potential, you know, billing issues with, you know, with payers or with the federal government, obviously. So I really think that the industry is not ever going to get to that level of unsupervised learning where a robot just works all of your AR. So, but that's fine, because I think the tools that are out there, the regression analytics, the robotic process automation, and the supervised machine learning are all going to provide, you know, a huge amount of value to the industry. You know, the last thing I've got kind of noted on the screen here is that all of this really has to work with trust, right? So like I said, with the compliance and the regulatory issues, if you don't know what the automation is doing, you're never going to be comfortable. If an auditor comes in and says, why were these actions taken on these accounts, or why was this, you know, change made in the system, or why was this documentation entered, and you don't have a good explanation, that's gonna you know, hinder the ability for the industry to really adopt this. So my point here is that whatever solutions you look at, make sure that you've got a good foundation of trust. Make sure that they're documenting everything, you know, along that process. Every decision is noted and recorded somewhere, so that you can actually trace that back and say, why was this action taken by this piece of automation? You don't want a black box, right? So you want to actually understand what's going on. So those are the key pieces of technology, and just to, you know, talk a little bit about where I think this value is in the industry. Everybody knows costs have always been going up. This year's been a little crazy with the way that revenues have been disrupted based on patient behaviors and patients choosing less elective services, which typically had been more profitable for organizations in the past. So the whole economics of running a hospital and RevCycle are really in flux right now. And that's why this technology is so important to the industry, and so important for the industry to actually move forward and adopt this in order for survival. So, you know, obviously, you know, you have the ability to kind of create this capacity to be able to work accounts without having employees, but you're also creating some stability, right? So, you know, think, 2 years, 5 years from now, when all of this is, pandemic stuff is past, and we're back to local issues, right? So if you have a disruption, if you have a snow day, a blizzard that closes your office for a week, you don't want your cash flow to be impacted just by the fact that people can't get into the office, right? So this is a way, to help insulate those fluctuations in capacity of having humans work in the rev cycle. Now, why is this so hard? I mean, why hasn't rev cycle adopted all of this technology, in the past? We're just getting there and scratching the surface of this in 2020. But the reason is because rev cycle and the way that the industry operates is so complex, right? There's so much hidden complexity and rules and exceptions to rules and payer guidelines and payer policies and procedures, and those change constantly, right? So I actually heard somebody at Becker's conference last year say that they were tracking payer guidelines changes, and that in 1 year, in a span of 1 year, for all major payers, they had tracked over 100,000 changes in guidelines of how you're supposed to interact with that particular payer. And obviously that's a huge amount of complexity for any one person or any one organization to capture. So, that's been part of the issue as to why. I have a little kind of anecdotal example of why, of the hidden levels of complexity. So everybody's familiar with Tesla and the electric cars, and the goal really to create self-driving autonomous cars. And their head of AI is a guy named Andre Kaparthi, and he actually did a webinar that I saw that really kind of highlighted why you think something might be easy, but it's really kind of insanely complex. And he was talking about a stop sign, right? So obviously, if a car is going to drive itself, it has to know what a stop sign is and what to do in that scenario. And when you think about it on the surface, it's like, okay, everybody knows what a stop sign is. You see the white letters on the red octagon, you stop, you're good, make sure there's no traffic, and you move on, right? But he said, when you think about it, there's so much, complexity on that, because there's things that affect whether you can detect that stop sign, right? So environmental conditions, like, is it rainy, is it foggy, are there trees that are blocking it or partially blocking it? Stop sign, can be mounted on a wall instead of on a pole. It can be on a temporary barricade sitting in the street. It can be held by a person, and if that person's holding it up, it means stop, and if they're holding it down, it doesn't, it means you can go. It can be blocked by other cars on the road. It can be part of another car on a road, like a school bus, right? So if the school bus has a stop sign and it's out, then it means it's active and you have to stop. If it's folded in, it means it's not active and you don't have to stop. So there's just a huge amount of variation. So the idea here and the anecdote is just things that you think simple, like in rev cycle, no authorization denial, right? So there's so much complexity really in actually solving that behind the scenes that I think that has been why it's been so hard for the industry really to capture all of this potential automation to date. Now, I think that's changing. I absolutely think that the frameworks that are in place now for supervised machine learning will be able to actually understand all of this over time. It will take us a couple years as an industry to start capturing this information. Obviously, the payers are going to continue to try to be a step ahead and change rules to kind of catch that and delay or defer payments. So the provider side of the industry has to be able to adapt to that, and I think this technology really is going to set us on the path to do that. All right, so I'm going to talk about a few areas where you can actually get some tangible value out of AI or the tool set under AI today. So these are things that you could go out, you could go to market, you could look for different vendors that are providing these services, and sign up with them and get going today. So there's really kind of 4 key areas that I think are opportunities today. And the first one is autonomous clinical coding. So CAC has been around for quite a number of years. Everybody thought that that was going to significantly transform, the industry, and it was helpful, but it really didn't change the paradigm of having a coder work an account. And so there's some new technology out right now that actually does the full coding process. So it's think of it as CAC on steroids, right? So it's going to do the evaluation of all of the clinical documentation, uses a language understanding engine to understand the clinical language that's in there. It assesses the different components of text within the clinical documentation. And it will analyze each sentence. It looks for ambiguous information. And if it knows everything, if it's got a confidence level that it's extracted all of the meaningful information, then it can actually assign the relevant ICD-10 code, CPT code, any other coding guidelines that are appropriate for that payer or that scenario. It can actually do all of that, and it does all of that with full documentation. So it'll actually create a PDF and say, here's the piece of the clinical record that led to the decision to use this code. Apply the logic, the rule for that coding logic, and document all of that. So fully documentation. And again, the idea here is that these kind of processes are going to pick up and take the easy, repetitive, recurring type stuff that currently are done by human coders, but could be done through automation and documentation. And the idea here is that if there's incomplete information, it goes to the coder. If it's complex, too complex for the algorithm, it goes to the coder. But you're basically alleviating some of that high volume, low dollar activity that current state, most organizations still has to be touched by people. A lot of coding had moved to offshore or nearshore to help with that. But this is kind of the next evolution, which is full automation of that. And again, it's fully documented with audit trails and everything. So it's really fascinating that we're able to get there. Obviously, it'll never get to the super complex inpatient coding level. But when you're thinking about kind of back to the idea of COVID and where we are in staffing from an industry at this point, where you may have challenges either in getting employees or in managing their productivity because they're working from home more than they used to. So it definitely creates the ability or the buffer for you to absorb some of that labor without having additional employees. So definitely kind of a fascinating piece of technology, and that's available in the industry today if you go out and search for it. The second is voice analytics. So this is a suite of technology that actually analyzes calls, and it can be done after calls for your customer service team are done, or it can be done real time. If you use a vendor for your patient customer service, you should check and make sure that they're, first of all, recording calls, but second of all, that they have a tool set like this available. If you're doing your own customer service in your organization, it's a huge benefit. And really, what the end result is that you have 100% QA on all of your calls. So every call gets listened to. The software can flag if somebody is irate or upset, and raise that. It can do keyword detection. If there are certain messages that your customer service people are supposed to say to patients, doing a HIPAA verification or doing a specific greeting that your organization wants you to say to every patient when you're on the phone with them, it can actually check for that and make sure that they're being compliant with that. And really enable you to quickly understand kind of the health of your communication, of your customer service communication with your patients. So definitely fascinating technology that's available in the marketplace today. The next couple of things are really process oriented, and they pull together the robotic process automation and the supervised machine learning. So there's kind of two of those big pieces pulled together into these solutions. And the first one is on authorization. So this is a intensive, resource-intensive process within healthcare organizations, whether we're talking about on the referring provider side, if you have you know, physicians employed by your health system, and those physician offices have to initiate those authorization requests to the payers. There's some complexity around answering all of the questions on the payer website, including clinical questions. And those are processes that can now be automated through the use of this robotic process automation and the machine learning to say, okay, when this payer asks this piece of clinical information in order to get an authorization, where do I go in the medical record in order to get that? What piece of documentation am I pulling out? Is it a test result? Is it a piece of documentation? And can I apply that into the payer web portal and provide that information for them in order to move that authorization forward to submission. On the rendering provider side, you have the inverse issue, which is you have a bunch of referring physicians who have hopefully requested all of their authorizations correctly, but you still need to do that validation to say that that scheduled service actually matches the authorization that was on file. Is it the right CPT code? Did they use the wrong CPT code when they did the authorization? Did they get the NPI or the location of the service correct, in the authorization request? So there's a bunch of validation that still has to happen, even if you're talking about the rendering provider side on the authorization equation. So both sides of that, there's an opportunity for this supervised machine learning automation to pick up these processes. They're very repetitive, but in the current state today, they definitely take a lot of resources in the industry. So that's one process automation that's available from multiple vendors in the rev cycle industry today. The other one that is process related is automating claims follow-up. So I mentioned earlier that there's been organizations around that have done web bots for a while. Obviously, we have HIPAA transactions, right? So you could get a 276, 277 request and response out to the payer. But a lot of the times on those HIPAA transactions, you don't have all of the underlying root cause information as to what went wrong with that claim. I mean, there's the dreaded CO16 CART code, right, which is just insufficient information to process the claim. It doesn't tell you what was missing. It could have been you needed missing an authorization. It could be they want a copy of a medical record. It could be coordination of benefits. It could be all sorts of things under CO16, right? But so if you get a HIPAA transaction back that says your claim's denied CO16, there's not enough information to actually do anything with that, right? You still have to work that claim. You have to go out and figure out what's going on. So the new generation of automation that's out there can actually go and retrieve that information, whether we're talking about logging into a payer website, whether we're talking about kind of drilling into 835 remark codes, wherever it is, wherever your rev cycle employees go today to work that account, the robotic process automation can learn how to go in and do that same thing. So the way this works is it'll go out and it'll absorb what employees are doing to work accounts. And then when it sees the same scenario the next time, it actually can present a recommended solution. So, oh, I know that this is Blue Cross. They use this denial code. It's this particular service line in the hospital. We know that this is the most likely action to take to get this claim to be resolved, right? So it's it needed a coding correction, or it needed a medical record uploaded to the payer website. Whatever that action is, it starts to learn that over time and pick that up and replicate that. So the human subject matter experts that are in this process are creating this iterative validation and kind of teaching the system really how to work the accounts. Now, obviously, new scenarios that have never been seen before, new denial codes, new payer guidelines, anything like that isn't already part of a business rule, that would just go back to your current work queues, and your current staff would learn that and pick that up. And again, if it starts to be repetitive, then the automation can learn that over time. And the automation is pretty sophisticated. So I mentioned earlier that the new platforms for robotic process automation can move between systems, and that really can include complex things like you get a claim response that says the payer wants the radiology report before they'll pay a claim. So the robotic process automation can read that, understand that that's what it needs. It can log into your clinical system. It can download it, find the report, download it to a PDF. It can switch over to the payer website. It can navigate to the right screen. It can upload that PDF, and it can then come back to your patient accounting system, and it can document notes of the actions that were taken, and says, retrieve document from clinical system, uploaded to payer, submitted for reprocessing, check back in 2 weeks, and set the review date forward on that account in the patient accounting system. So it can really navigate across all of those different applications in your organization. And like I said, every health system has a different set of technologies. Obviously a lot of people use Epic, but there's always bolt-ons. If you're using Meditech, you might have more ancillary systems where less things are included, some of the older patient accounting systems. But really the robotic process automation doesn't care, right? It can pick up anything that any system that your employees are using, and it can replicate those actions. So that's really kind of the two big process opportunities right now in RevCycle, the pre-auth and the automated claims follow-up, that are really emerging as opportunities for you to help alleviate the burden of losing staff due to COVID, or losing productivity due to COVID. The fourth thing, and I mentioned this a little bit when talking about propensity to pay scores that are out there in the industry, are these prediction tools. So this is a little bit more abstract. So I was talking about process automation before, with the authorizations and the claim statuses, where the automation can actually do the work. When we talk about the prediction tools, this is really about optimizing your resources. So this isn't something that's actually going to work accounts, but it can help you prioritize. So propensity to pay has been around for a long time. Hopefully, you or all your customer service vendors are using that to prioritize which patients should be called in order to pay their bill. But you can take that same logic and you can actually apply it to the insurance side. So can you predict when a payer is going to respond to a claim? Absolutely. And if, for example, your major commercial payer typically pays claims, on 22 days after you submit that claim. Well, there's no reason why you would ever want anybody to do a follow-up on day 14, right? 2 weeks been billed, time to do a follow-up. But if you know that payer is always going to respond to that claim on around day 22, then you wait till day 23, day 24, and you've optimized that resource that would have kind of done a claim status check and said, oh, that claim's still in process, document it and move on to the next account, right? But that didn't really add a lot of value from a work perspective in your RevCycle team. So you want to take that employee who did that kind of non-value add claim status and put them on, oh, this claim got rejected, I need to fix something so I can actually get it paid. So you're optimizing those resources. You can actually kind of take that a step further, right? And you can and predict on a denied claim or a rejected claim, what's the probability you can fix it. Now this one, it gets a little bit more abstract from the RevCycle perspective, and I've absolutely been part of organizations that would not be comfortable thinking this way, but theoretically you could say, I got this claim denied, we've seen this 100 times with this payer, we've appealed it, we've never won the appeal, we've never been able to overturn this, we're stuck. So theoretically, you could say, okay, we're not going to appeal it. Or maybe if you're trying to preserve some appeal rights, you'd send an automated appeal letter, right, with almost no effort, right? But so the idea here is that you could actually rank order, all of your denied accounts, all of your rejected claims, and say, which one should I work first? Because those are the ones that are going to actually drive the cash. And if you run out of employee resources, you know that you've at least worked, the top section of the list, so that the most valuable claims are actually getting touched first, and then the least valuable claims would be touched last. And if you didn't get to the end of the list, you're really not hurting your organization financially. So that's a big mindset change for RevCycle operations, in kind of the idea of not working accounts. but you can use the data to prove that point and say, okay, it really is no value. Yes, I can pay an employee, $15 to spend, an hour working up an appeal, but that appeal is going to get rejected, and I'm never going to get that claim paid. So, some organizational decisions there about your resources that really kind of come into play. So there's propensity to pay, there's predictive tools around the payer behavior and responsiveness, and then also charity, right? So you can use a prediction model to look at presumptive need for your community benefit. So patients who aren't cooperative with the process of applying for charity, they're apathetic, right? They came in through the ED, they don't care, they're not going to respond. You can still use some data analytics to look at that patient and say, would they likely meet the indigency requirements of our financial assistance policy, and could we move them, rather than putting them in bad debt, can we put them in presumptive charity? It's all uncompensated care, right? So it doesn't affect the financials of the hospital, but it does give you that community benefit value for 501R that you can pick up and capture. So those are some of the prediction tools that are out there. And again, those are a little bit more abstract about more optimizing what resources you have versus actually taking the action required. But I still think they fall into the suite of artificial intelligence, because you're using your data and using the tools to work smarter rather than working harder. So those are really kind of the four key areas of solutions that are available to you as rev cycle leaders today. That I absolutely think that if you're not already looking at these, you should be asking questions. You should be looking at vendors that are out there and exploring those options for your organizations. The last thing I wanted to touch on, and then I'll open it up to some questions, is just the impact on the staff. So, people get scared when you talk about automation, right? They're scared that they're going to lose their jobs and you're not going to need them anymore. And I really think that, you can approach artificial intelligence with as more of a evolution of changing the way people that do their work rather than elimination of people. It's not going to eliminate jobs. We still, I was talking about using subject matter experts to teach the automation how to do the work. You're absolutely still going to need your seasoned rev cycle employees to do that and understand what needs to happen in order to move through a process, to fix something, to get something done right. You're definitely going to need those people. So really what you're doing is elevating the RPA industry calls this upskilling, right? So you're taking employees who did maybe some basic repetitive work and some complex work, and you're taking the easy basic work away and you're focusing them on that critical thinking complex work. So you're actually helping these employees grow and mature in their skill sets over time. So I think there's an interesting approach here, which is, you position this as elevating your employees and valuing their critical thinking and their skills and their knowledge in order to be successful in the industry. So, I just wanted to bring that back together and say, this is not all about eliminating jobs. It's about being smarter, being more sophisticated, being able to play at the same level that some of the major national payers are playing at with artificial intelligence, and trying to balance that a bit so that you're doing you are creating some efficiencies by potentially reducing some costs in the organization. You're creating that stability for the rev cycle, the cash flow, to make sure that the organization stays healthy, and you're helping your people grow as part of the industry. Awesome. Well, doesn't look like there's any questions, so I will wrap it up. Obviously, you can hear that I'm kind of passionate about this. If anybody has any, follow-up questions, you want to talk one-on-one, feel free to take my contact information and reach out to me. Definitely, always happy to talk to my colleagues and give you my insight as to, what you should be looking at in terms of artificial intelligence.